When the perfect comes, the imperfect will pass away. When I was a child, I used to speak like a child, think like a child, reason like a child. But when I became an adult, I put childish ways aside. Now we see indistinctly, as in a mirror. Then we will see face to face. My knowledge is imperfect now. Then I will know, even as I am known.
Good morning. It is an honor and a joy to be with you. I want to thank Kelly for the invitation to come and spend a weekend with you and get to know you. I've really enjoyed being not only with you, but in this setting. This is a beautiful setting. The music is extraordinary. I'm really feeling uplifted by that. Yesterday you heard me say that worship is an invitation to encounter the sacred. I find few things that allow me to access the sacred as fully and as beautifully as good music well played, so thank you. My first date with the woman I've been married to now for almost 40 years was a Joni Mitchell concert, so you brought me back. I'm going to do less preaching today than storytelling. I'm going to tell a story within a story within a story, and hopefully by the time I'm finished that will make sense. The story begins with his reading from Paul in his letter to the Corinthians. And in some ways, he's telling the story of his own journey in faith and how step after step after step, he meets with failure along the way. He has written about, he often does things that he doesn't want or intend to do, knowing that he's let people down or let God down, and yet he can't not do that. And he describes his choosing his pathway here at the end of this passage in Corinthians as seeing indistinctly. That phrase resonates deeply with my journey and my story, and I doubt that I'm alone. And I'm going to say a little bit about that and about another one who came to a point in his life where he was clearly seeing indistinctly and knowing imperfectly, and for that reason making bad choices. I was packing the van up early one morning, a van that would take about 23 children and our luggage for the week. There were actually two vans. For a week doing mission work somewhere. With me on the journey was a gentleman by the name of Mike Ferraro, who's sitting in the back right there. He lives in Buffalo, New York, and came by. We've been friends ever since. The first time that we met was on a mission trip in 1989 on the shores of Ashtabula, Ohio. And fate would conspire to throw us together, me with my dear friend Judy Nipmeyer, Mike with his father, and we discovered each other and have been fast friends ever since. He's the biggest pain in the butt I've ever known, and yet you can't not love Mike Ferraro. So I was packing the van up, and I would be gone for about 10 days. And knowing a couple of things about me, my wife came to say goodbye, but as she did, she handed me a gift. And the gift was a 2-CD set. It was a newly released album by my second favorite songwriter and artist and musician of all time, Van Morrison. And the name of the album was Hymns to the Silence. That was Friday evening. We would drive as far as we could Friday, part of Saturday to get where we needed to be. I think it was Franklin, Louisiana, Mike, if I'm not mistaken. We had stopped on Friday night, going as far as we could at a church that we had prearranged to spend the night at, sleeping on the floor. We had just gotten all of the youth down and turned the lights off, and as I often do before I go to sleep, I took that CD out and I listened to music falling asleep. And I started playing it, and he had me hooked at the beginning. Second song on the album is the song that sets up really the entire 2-album set of music, and it's entitled Not Feeling It Anymore. It's a beautiful song, a wonderful steady rhythm in the background played by Van Morrison on the piano, and that beautiful Irish tenor voice of his belts out with all of the passion he can muster the opening line, which says, have to get back to base, not feeling it anymore. I can't feel it in my throat, that's all she wrote. That becomes not only the theme for the song, it becomes the reason why he wrote 2 albums of hymns to the silence. He was living through a period of his life where, borrowing Paul's language, he was seeing indistinctly. He had allowed his fame, he had allowed his wealth, he had allowed all of the adulations that he had accrued through life to sort of fill him with a sense of pride that overtook his life. He describes in that song, Not Feeling It Anymore, the steps that he had taken on his pathway and his journey that found him in this period of silence. Silence, as I'll explain in a minute, became the overriding metaphor for where he was in his life at this point. Verses that talk about the parties that he went to, the alcohol he consumed, the drugs that he used, the fame that he allowed go to his head, the money that he wasted, the sycophants who would shower him with love, praise, and attention, but who were just with him because of the fame that he attracted and the money that he had, and all of that got him to a point where he reached a place in his life where, as he writes, I'm not feeling it anymore. I don't feel it in my throat. That's all she wrote. This is a musician. This is a songwriter. This is an artist. This is somebody who doesn't just take on the craft of producing music as a way to make money. It was for him his life. The music was always inside of him. From his early days, you felt there was something different about this artist. And he, like my favorite songwriter of all time, Bob Dylan, now well into their 80s, continue to produce not just music, but art. And it's amazing how much they've produced through the years. But this is a point where the music went dry. That's why he called it the silence. The music that had always run through his body, his heart, his soul, and that came out in this beautifully expressed art was gone. I'm not feeling it anymore. There's nothing left in my throat. And that's all she wrote. And he went into this depression and he couldn't get out of it. And as he wrote, the songs didn't help, the drinks didn't help, the money didn't help, the drugs didn't help, the fame didn't help. Nothing that he turned to could get him out of this. And I'm listening to that piece of music, trying to fall asleep, and it's just pulling me in as he's telling a story very familiar to me about how we as human beings can see the world and the trappings that it offers as our pathway to happiness, as the place where we can find ourselves secure, enough money, enough power, enough wealth, enough fame, all of that. And what Van Morrison discovered, that many of us discover along the way, those being the paths that we might choose, is those are false trappings. And they lead to things like depression and loneliness and anxiety and stress. And all of that led him to a place where he just couldn't feel it anymore. That's all she wrote. So he had this tremendous insight that rather than, as he had been trying to do, flee from that or run from that or medicate himself through that or drink himself through that, he was just going to pause and absorb the silence. And in that moment, he created this concept that became this album of writing his hymns to the silence, of embracing it fully and admitting that this is who he was. And as the wisdom of that, as I lay there on my cot that night, watching everybody fall asleep, and I couldn't, listening to song after song after song, I became absorbed by what he was doing. That the line that precedes not feeling it anymore, I can't feel it in my throat, that's all she wrote, was really what the song was about. It wasn't so much about telling the story of his depression, which was a key part of this. The line that preceded that was the key to it all. Got to get back to base. He realized that he knows that there's a foundation upon which he can build his life if that becomes his focus. And every song, every hymn to the silence that follows that is him getting back to his base. There's love songs. There's stream of consciousness songs that he writes about growing up on Hindford Street as a child in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Songs about the music that he heard. Songs by musicians that he grew up listening to. And all of that helped him get back to his base. And I'm listening to all of this, amazed by it. And I'm just about ready to fall asleep when, in that beautiful Irish tenor voice of his, he starts singing what is my favorite hymn, and always has been, Be Thou My Vision. And it just caught me. It struck me. And I listened to the wisdom of what he was saying. This person who had lost his way. This person who had been consumed by a silence that was eating him up and depressing him. This person who had made decision after decision after decision, choosing a pathway that led to this place of depression and silence. Now getting back to his base and singing, confessionally, Be Thou My Vision. We know to whom that hymn is directed. It's directed to our God, our Creator, and that this rock star, this musician world-renowned, would, in getting back to his base, confess to us all his deep and profound faith in this God and say prayerfully and confessionally in front of the world to God, Be Thou My Vision, was a deeply, powerfully moving experience. And in effect what he's saying is, as Paul confesses in Corinthians, I see indistinctly. Left to my own choosings and my own devices, these are the pathways down which I would go. And time after time after time, those pathways lead me to places I don't want to be. And so God, here's the confession, you be my vision. Help me see what you see. Help me understand that when I look at another human being, if I don't like what they're wearing, it doesn't mean they're not decent human beings. If I don't like the accent in their voice or the color of their hair or where they come from or the decisions that they've made, I don't have to judge them. I don't have to condemn them. I don't have to dislike them. I don't have to be uncomfortable in front of them, because if I can begin to see them as you do, I will see them as the beautiful children of God that they are. God, be thou my vision. Be thou my vision, and help me to see that when I feel insecure, more money isn't the pathway to my security. More fame isn't the pathway to my security. More recognition isn't the pathway to my security. More power, more authority isn't the pathway to my security. Help me to see that my security comes in the love that I extend to others and receive back from them. Be thou my vision. That's what Van Morrison was singing, and that was him in his hymn to the silence, trying to get back to his base and re-secure his position of health and wholeness and fullness, and get back the music that continually poured through his soul. And that's what he was doing. And there have been many times in my life when I have returned to that album and to that song because I have lost my way. And I need that direction. I see indistinctly. There's something about the way this whole worship service has been crafted, Kelly, that's really beautiful and leads to this. That hymn, Lead Kindly Light. The first time I encountered that in a beautiful poem written by Cardinal Henry Newman was put to music. I was watching an episode of Northern Exposure. Do you remember that movie? It's one of my favorites. And I think Chris was the name of the radio DJ that played music and expounded and waxed philosophically on air. And there was an episode where they were dealing with the Alaskan phenomenon of the the long nights, the endless nights, and a whole season in which the sun shines maybe 3 hours every day, and people go through depression because of that. And all of a sudden, throughout the episode, people's light bulbs or the neon lights in front of their businesses were disappearing. And it became a big mystery. What's happening? Who's stealing our lights? And in the closing scene, Chris, having experienced everybody sort of getting angry at each other and allowing the lack of light to, brighten their spirits, calls them all out into the street in the middle of one of these long nights, and there's this massive structure with a big tarp over it, and everybody's wondering, what is this? And he pulls it off, throws a switch, and he had all of the light bulbs he had collected, he built into this massive sculpture, and his light shines, and he starts reading the lines from that Cardinal Henry Newman poem, "Lead kindly light, lead thou me on. The night is dark and I am far from home, lead thou me on." It is a confessional way of saying once again that I cannot see clearly left to my own devices. So again, speaking directly to the Creator, you lead. Let your kindly light show me pathways not of my choosing but of yours. That act of confessional giving your will over to the Creator is what Paul writes about in Corinthians. It's what Cardinal Henry Newman writes about in Lead Kindly Light. It's what Van Morrison writes about in Hymns to the Silence. It's what the author of Be Thou My Vision is saying and expressing. And it is through my experience, and this is my witness and confession to you, how I find myself over and over and over again, returning to pathways not of my choosing, but the God's. And there's wisdom in that. Less a sermon than a story. I share this with you and invite you to reflect on whether or not there's any wisdom in the music, in the words, in the stories. And I just pray that all of us at some point reach a point where we see each other through God's eyes. What a world that would be. Amen.